Should we have names for all of the sub-disciplines of parkour? I strongly think yes, and over the next couple minutes, I hope that I'm going to convince you, or at least start a very helpful conversation that lets us explore this in a little bit more detail. So for me, this all started a few months ago when I was chatting with my neighbor, and he and his wife are big into mountain biking, and they asked me something that I'd never had a non-parkour person ask me in 20 years of training. And that was, what style of parkour did I practice? And it was perceptive and got me thinking, what is the point in differentiating or starting to normalize subdisciplines or genres or styles of parkour? Does it even matter? And I guess I'll start with that. To me, I think there are three places where it actually does matter. And those are commercialization, how you work in a commercial sense with other people, education, and competition. And I think competition is the most obvious, right? You look at a competition like SPL and they have skill, speed, and style. They set those boundaries so that there is a common set of expectations and standards for people to be judged by. You're not going to judge a speed athlete on how aesthetically they complete the course. You're only going to judge them on how fast they complete the course. But I also think that that type of boundary setting and guidelines can be helpful for education. So let's say you're totally new to parkour. As a coach, I've experienced this regularly. You get a 13-year-old kid and you don't know if they came in because they saw a Ninja Warrior, they saw a Storer video, they saw a Dom video, or they're a G-Tramper. And often you're having to do a lot of work to figure out what they think parkour even is in the first place and what they want out of a class. And in that situation, I could see it being really helpful to a coach and also to a student to have more established lanes that they can explore and know, oh yeah, I'm really interested in going fast, or oh, I'm really interested in improving my acrobatics. Finally, I think that in the commercial world, this is especially helpful. And I had a few people, when I posted this question on Instagram a little bit ago, respond in the affirmative here too. I have regularly worked on commercial shoots where they've hired me expecting me to be a stuntman and able to do 30-foot falls onto cardboard boxes, or being able to double back and land it on a trampoline. None of those things are in my skill set. And, I would do my best with what they wanted, but I think there's regularly a disconnect between what maybe somebody who's hiring a parkour athlete wants or expects and what that parkour athlete is actually capable of, and establishing some kind of common language around setting those boundaries and expectations and standards would be really helpful. So the next time that you end up on a commercial shoot, the Nike director who's interested in making the coolest parkour video that they can with tons of high impact front flips hires Dom or Jan Schlappen, and they don't hire me, and end up with somebody who really just likes to do rail precisions. So before we dig into my perspective on maybe how we can start to define those styles, I think there's another interesting division we can talk about, and that is sort of competition style versus street style. This came up also a lot in my conversations with folks on Instagram when I asked people what they thought about this idea as a whole. And a lot of people started to say, well, I see really two styles of parkour. There's people who, train for competition, specifically adapting their parkour to a competition format like SPL. And then there's people who just go out on the street and train. I think that the comp versus street distinction is really interesting. I don't think that it's kind of black and white, right? A lot of people, like Ed Scott being a great example, train for competition and also kill it on the streets. So it's not like one or the other. And you'll see that for all of these subdisciplines. These are not things that, restrict parkour athletes to only doing a certain style. They're just ways of communicating what those athletes are already doing to each other and to the outside world. But the competition versus street sort of dichotomy here, I think is a great way to illuminate the guiding force for all of this, and that is intention and goal setting. This to me is the key when we're deciding what actually makes up a genre or a style and how narrow we want to get with that. So the goal for a competition athlete or somebody training in a comp style is to win in competition or perform to the best of their ability in that specific format. So you're not going to maybe do 2-minute skill rounds in your everyday training if you're just going out and training on the streets. If you're training for SPL, that might be something that you work into your daily training a little bit more. Whereas a street athlete, their goal is just to go out and find challenges and have a good time and challenge themselves and maybe film some clips if that's part of it. I guess you could say filming is true for the comp style and the street style. That's the unifying factor in parkour. But I think identifying that the goal of the training is sort of our guiding light in how we define and establish these subdisciplines is really helpful right now. So let's kind of dive into what those might look like. And a great place to start is actually the SPL format, skill, speed, style. Again, this came up all the time on the Instagram comments of people saying maybe that's all that we need to talk about. I do think it's a great start. I think style is relatively self-explanatory. I'm going to do my best to give specific athlete and video examples so that you guys can understand what I mean, since we don't have this common terminology. But I think a style athlete, you think of somebody like Ellis Torhall, you think of Aiden or Shea Rudolph. They're people who are primarily, whether it's for competition or on the streets, putting together lines and combos that are really heavy and acrobatic. I think it's going to always be possible in these genres to go deeper, but for now, I think let's leave it there and just say style feels like a solid place to start. And I think the same is true for speed. You know, the goal for a speed athlete, whether they're doing one of Ryan Ford's outdoor Google Maps courses or they're competing in SPL, is to establish a route or run a route as quickly as possible and then just continue to refine and get the best time. Skill, I think, requires a little bit more picking apart. For me, the first thing that I have against skill is just the name. I think that saying skill parkour works great for SPL as a comp format, but I guess if I were going to name it as a genre or subdiscipline in parkour, I'd go more towards something like calling it technical parkour, or I've heard Ryan Ford and some other folks call it challenge parkour. All of these names, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the comments. I think one thing we miss from the forum days is the ability to have back and forth discussions within the international community. So if you have recommendations for any of these, I'll say what I have thought of. Obviously, feel free to disagree with me at all times. But to me, the goal of technical parkour is to max out the technical potential of specific parkour movements or techniques. I guess that's why I like technical. It's because it kind of ties to techniques, and that is the foundation for a technical parkour athlete. They're taking something like a Kong precision, and then they're focusing on either increasing, I guess, the finesse or the technique, the technicality of it, right? How thin is the rail that you can land on? How crappy is the angle that you can stick it at? And then they're also focusing on output. So to me, technical parkour is kind of pushing simultaneously technique and output, whereas style is about, acrobatics, line building. Speed is about going through a course as quickly as possible. Technical parkour, output, and technique. I do think then there are a couple other things that are worth mentioning. The maybe most obvious and most recent innovation that we've seen is something that I've heard people call contemporary parkour. I actually love this term because it combines contemporary dance and parkour. This is what people like Matt McCreary, Elias Zimakov, I think is another good example, are doing, where they're using the environment in a way that feels designed to get the observer to think about it. And I think in that sense, it's inherently a little bit more artistic of a parkour style than something like technical parkour or speed parkour. It really feels like they're taking the observer, whether it's in person or on video, into account when they're creating how they interact with the line. And that's where I think it really does start to blur the line between dance and parkour, which is fascinating to me. It's not a style that I've really pursued yet or am particularly interested in for myself. But I do think it's really interesting and deserves its own kind of demarcation when we're starting to throw out ideas for how to define these subgenres. There are two others, and neither of them are quite as popular as those first four, or at least have not been as viral recently. The next one, I'm going to call it micro parkour. And to me, the flagship examples of this are videos like Parkour Imaginatively, Pink Clouds, Do Die Dinosaurier. This is kind of the It's very German, Finnish style, where it's very similar to technical parkour, but instead of maxing out output and technicality, it really feels like output is not a concern and technicality is the top concern. In some ways, I think it also is similar to contemporary parkour in that it investigates the complexities of the environment a little bit more. You're often in micro parkour videos going to see people using really strange, weird, small features in the environment that maybe they would have skipped over if they were just trying to do the biggest stride rail precision plyo out that they could find. So to me, the intention of micro parkour feels different enough from technical parkour to justify its own sub-genre or sub-discipline. And this is a style that I really hope actually gains popularity again. It was really popular about 10 years ago. And it feels to me, as somebody who is about to be 33 pretty soon, like a great way to continue to explore the outer reaches of what's technically possible in parkour for me without necessarily having to put my body through the wear and tear of also trying to max out on the output or scale. We've got two more, and both of these I'm a little bit less sold on and I'm more open to critique on, but I did want to throw them out there because when you're looking at it from the lens of, goal setting, I do think they're different enough from the styles we've mentioned that they deserve a mention. And the first one of those would be what maybe I would call trad parkour or old school parkour. It is that sort of Yamakasi parkour generations training. So it's training that's heavily physical. It almost is combining parkour with calisthenics and CrossFit in the way that Yamakasi sessions were. I think a trad parkour session would look a lot more like somebody doing circuits of a dead hang, some simple vaults to get their cardio up, and then, maybe doing QM for 100 meters. That's a very different look than a micro parkour session or even a speed parkour or technical parkour session. And I think there's a big enough representation of that style of movement in the community, particularly around the sort of parkour generations branch of parkour that practices that and is drawn to that style of parkour that it deserves a mention here. The last style I would say I will call flow parkour, for lack of a better word. I think this one is epitomized by the video Shine from Min in Berlin. And you see a lot of people talk about flow. I think flow is a general aspect of all parkour movement. You can see it in any style of practice, but I do think that there are certain athletes where the intention for their training is just to link moves as smoothly as possible. And flow parkour to me feels the most amorphous because it has huge carryover to every style, right? You can think of somebody like Foskey who really blends technical parkour with flow or style parkour with flow. You can think of somebody like Mel McQueen who maybe is using the environment in a low power output way that's really creative, that blends almost like micro parkour with flow, or somebody like Chloe Reynolds who maybe is walking the line between contemporary parkour and flow. So I'm not that sold on whether or not it deserves its own genre or style, but I do think that there are people whose intention is to maximize that stat in their movement, and they build all of their challenges, all of their interactions with the environment around them through that lens. And in that sense, it does feel like it deserves a mention here. So if you think it's valid or not, again, I'm hoping that this is a conversation starter. Either respond in video or respond in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I think I've given you a lot to chew on, and I'm going to just wrap up those subgenres really quick one more time and give you a summary so that you have some time to digest. The first thing I want you to keep in mind is what defines a style for me is the intention and how you're setting your goals in your training session. Within that framework, I think you can start to identify specific styles, and the ones that I've outlined, right, are style parkour, speed parkour, technical parkour, micro parkour, contemporary parkour, flow parkour, and trad parkour. There is a part of me that cringes trying to put this much formality to it. But again, I think the intention here isn't for me to go to somebody and say, oh, you're a contemporary parkour athlete, or oh, you're practicing contemporary parkour. The intention is to provide a framework for people to explore and communicate what they like and they don't like about parkour, so that they can understand that maybe they saw a capstone video. It's the same thing that Mel McQueen is doing. It's the same sport. It's all under the same umbrella. And there's a broad level of goal setting and challenge that's applicable to each of these styles. And in fact, one person can do all of these styles, right? Nobody's limited to how they can approach parkour just because we're starting to put names on it. And I do want to emphasize that this is something that I think that we do subconsciously all the time, right? If I say somebody is a style athlete, I think people would know what I mean. If I said somebody's a skill athlete, people would know what I mean. And that comes from, the SPL format. But I think even before that, we started to understand that athletes have tendencies to explore one arena or style of movement more than the other. And I think that instead of shying away from that and leaving someone who's maybe new to parkour or trying to understand parkour culture in more depth, leaving them in an open field and saying, go in any way you want, right? We give them a couple of options. Maybe you want to try speed parkour. You're not a huge fan. That's totally fine. It doesn't mean parkour is not for you. Why don't you try one of these other activities? And it doesn't mean that they have to just pick one. It's just there are ways that they can start to conceptualize how broad and diverse parkour is and not maybe feel shut down because they either are overwhelmed by the opportunities that parkour presents, or they can't even see those opportunities because they've gotten one bad experience and now associate the entire sport with just that one style of movement that maybe didn't agree with them. So I think that my biggest takeaway in this summary for you is when you think about this and you think about if it's worth it or how it might affect your day-to-day training, think about it less as something that we as parkour practitioners maybe use to communicate and more as a framework that we can develop to help communicate the intricacies and awesome diversity of our sport to other people. I'm really curious to hear what you think about this. I hope that you found it interesting, if not insightful. And I would love to hear your thoughts if you agree or disagree. Again, I grew up in the parkour.net forum days, and without forums for people to bash each other, I felt like a video essay or a vlog like this was going to be the best way to get my point across and start to initiate this conversation. So let me know what you think. Does this matter? Should we do it? Do these names suck? I would love to hear it. Thank you for taking the time to watch this.